Welcome to episode number 41 of Just Go Grind, a show that focuses on helping you launch and grow a business and navigate the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. I'm Justin Gordon, your host, and in this episode we have Molly Sullivan, who is the owner of Miss Molly's Cafe and Pastry Shop in my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in this episode, we discuss how to launch and grow a restaurant. I've always kind of been curious about this, and so I was excited to talk to Molly, get the ins and outs of financing a restaurant, and also how you get staffing, how you get the word out about it. All those details are discussed, the ups and downs of the whole entire process, including how she had to go to multiple locations to finally actually get her restaurant and had to pitch so many different banks and financing institutions to get the financing to actually open this restaurant. She has a ton of experience in the industry and initially started with pastries and as a pastry chef and eventually launched her own business on the side as a side hustle. And now in 2017, she launched this physical, actually retail location, restaurant, and has ambitions of doing much, much more, of which we discuss in this episode. As always, the show notes are at justgogrind.com/podcast, and you can support the show in iTunes. Leave a rating and review and subscribe in iTunes. Just search Just Go Grind, or if you're on your phone, scroll to the bottom of this episode. You can write a rating and review. Would much so appreciate that. Without further ado, here is Molly Sullivan from Miss Molly's. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk with you. And I've always kind of wondered about having a business that has a physical location and the ups and downs and challenges associated with that. So I definitely wanted to talk to you about that. But first, I wanted to get into kind of a little bit about your background and the places you worked before you started Miss Molly's Cafe and Pastry Shop.
Sure.
So where were some of those other places you had worked at?
Well, I have worked in restaurants since high school, so it's actually the only job I've ever had in one form or the other, whether it's serving, bartending, cooking. So it's been a while. But as a pastry chef, I went to culinary school in Minneapolis, so I had my first official baking jobs there.
Okay.
The first place I got hired was called the Birchwood Cafe, which is this little neighborhood. Well, not little anymore, really. They've expanded a lot, but it's just true neighborhood type of place that makes all their food from scratch and uses a lot of sustainable and really promotes organic and local. And that was kind of my mecca. I was so excited to have been hired there because those are all the kinds of things that I believe in with our food system, etc. So it was kind of cool to really kick off my career at a place that I believed in so much.
Yeah.
And that kind of carried forward through all the places that I worked at from that point forward.
Okay. Well, that's good. No worries. So was that the place that you knew right away that you wanted to work at, like after school?
Yeah. I honestly don't remember how I found out about it, but I think I probably was just researching that kind of place and it came up and that was kind of it for me. I was like, this is the type of place I want to work in, the type of place I want to someday own. So it kind of set the bar for me of the type of environment I wanted to be in the workplace.
Going into that experience, then you had obviously some expectations in terms of what it would be, and then you worked there. Did it live up to what you kind of were expecting from that place?
Yeah, I think I knew that going into food service was going to be tough. I think that's something that people don't always know or realize when they go in or down this career path. So I knew it was going to be hard work. I did not realize how hot it was going to be.
Wait, what?
Like always so hot in restaurant kitchens. And that is something I did not know. That's something you have to adjust to every summer is how hot it is. But
oh goodness.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. But I think it was a great experience for me to really see the operations of a business that has strong ethical values behind what they do. They're not just making food to sell it. There's a larger purpose behind what they're doing. So that was a cool experience for me to be able to see that and work in that environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then where did you end up going from there?
Well, I spent a few tourist seasons on and off working in Door County, Wisconsin. Which is,
Oh, so
yeah,
nice.
yeah, it's gorgeous. So
Yes.
it's, a tourist town. So they have seasons where they have people working there through the summer and partially through the fall. So I spent a few summers working up there. And then from there, I wound up one year in the off season moving out to Seattle with a friend, which was also an incredible experience for me. I've always wanted to live on the West Coast. So it was kind of like I was only there for 7 or 8 months, but it was this little kind of vacation from living in the Midwest.
Right. A little break from the Midwest. I think a lot of people, it seems like they end up staying in the Midwest if they're from the Midwest. I've noticed that, at least among my friends. There's very few of us who have gotten out and kind of stayed out for a bit.
But you always get reeled back in somehow.
Somehow. There's still hope. Maybe I'll end up there, but I think West Coast is where it's at. I also saw, like, just looking through kind of your resume and everything, like you worked at Braise once you got back to Milwaukee. So after Seattle, were you in Milwaukee right after Seattle?
I went back to Door County one more season. I worked for my friend up there. She owns a coffee shop, and which was also a cool thing for me to work for a young female entrepreneur who was just hustling and making her business work. And she was definitely an inspiration for me. So I wound up going and back to Door County and working for her for another season, and then came down to Milwaukee at that point because I was kind of tired of doing the whole season to season thing and moving around, and just decided if I'm going to start this business, I want to start doing it. So I knew that ultimately I was going to wind back up in Milwaukee because I'm close with my family and just couldn't really see myself settling down somewhere without them there. So I moved back here, and at that point was when I was hired at Braise.
Awesome. And I want to just ask real quick, with working for the friend in Door County who had the coffee shop, you mentioned she like hustling and like, what did you learn during that experience, that few months there?
Well, I think being an observer of her was kind of eye-opening for me, in that you have to work so hard if you own a business. I mean, it's just, you're the one there in the morning opening, you're the one there closing, because no one cares as much as you care. And if it's gonna do well, then you're the person who has to make that happen. And she just hustled so hard every day. I mean, she'd be there, 4 a.m. and if there needed to be stuff done after she closed, she'd be there until 6 or 7 p.m. And that's just what she did. And I was like, wow, it was so admirable for me to see. And also, for some strange reason, I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah, so that's such a cool experience to have, that to be able to see the hustle, see the grind, especially if you haven't been in it yourself yet, to experience someone else working so hard to make their dream a reality. And then I know you mentioned that you eventually went to Braise to work at Braise, and that was a pastry chef role there,
correct?
Right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was kind of the same thing for me when I got hired at the Birchwood, of this place that had all these, ideals behind their food. And it was kind of the same getting hired at Braise. I was really happy to be there because the whole business is founded on sustainability and local economy and local produce, local farms, all of that. So I was super excited to be a part of that. And I was hired on just a few months after they opened. So I really was given this opportunity to make my role, kind of make it up in a way. I got my hands involved with a lot of different aspects of the business, not just desserts, but that was originally why I was hired for their pastry chef. So I got a lot of creative freedom in that role, and really was able to kind of figure out my working style in that role. And also, like I said, I wound up learning a lot about other aspects of the business too, because I was part of building it up from the beginning.
Yeah, and I remember having so many, like being from Milwaukee, and I used to be a personal trainer in Milwaukee. There were so many of my clients, whoever had mentioned Braise. Actually, I remember hearing that. So when I saw it on your resume, I was like, "Oh, you worked there.
Yeah,
That's awesome," because that seemed like such a cool place to
yeah,
be,
yeah.
a cool
It was
restaurant
a
to go
great
to. Yeah,
experience for me for a lot of different reasons.
yeah. And along this whole journey, the reason I like to get a little bit of backstory is because, especially for entrepreneurs trying to think of what business to start and what some people may have an idea of what that business is or whatever, and others may more so fall into it based on what you're interested in. And I'm curious as to when the pastry started for you. Like, I think it was parties that you mentioned, maybe. Like, when did that
Yeah,
start?
so when I went to culinary school in 2009, I kind of set out to open my own cafe. That's just what I wanted to do. I went to undergrad. I have a degree in sociology and thought that I would go to grad school for social work or something along those lines, and then ultimately wound up doing this instead.
A little different.
Yeah, so I went to culinary school with the intention of I'm going to open a cafe. I'm not sure how that's done or how I'm going to do it, but that's going to be my goal. And that was kind of the starting point. And then when I moved back to Milwaukee in 2012 or 2011, I started my business on the side just to kind of get my foot in the door of owning a business and starting the path of how to figure that out, and without taking some huge financial risk or anything like that. I just kind of dipped my toe in first by doing this business on the side.
Yeah, I think it's very important to mention that because, especially anyone thinking of starting something, like it doesn't have to be diving in full to make something happen. And some cases it is where you really need to just kind of quit the job and go for it. But other cases, you can start something on the side, make progress, and go from there. And so, knowing that you wanted to start this and you started on the side, like what were some of those first things you did to either get clients and like kind of get the business rolling on the side?
Yeah, so my brother conveniently happens to be a web designer. So he
Nice.
owns his own business as well in St. Louis doing web development and branding and things like that. So he helped me design this amazing website and logo and all that. So I kind of had a leg up in that department. Um, so he helped me do that, and I had to with any kind of commercial food business, you have to work out of a commercial kitchen. So that was kind of my first hurdle, was finding a commercial kitchen to rent space from. So I just emailed different restaurants in the area that were only open during the day so that I would potentially be able to rent out their kitchen at nighttime when they're closed. So
Oh,
so that's kind of few and far between that those businesses exist. And I luckily came across this cafe in Milwaukee called The National, which at the time was owned by Nell Benton. She's been a huge role model for me, but she's a younger female entrepreneur, and she was like, "Hey, could I rent kitchen space from you?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." So she was just kind of the
like
mindset of
great.
paying it forward. And she was like, "Yeah, I want to help other women do the same thing," and which was really cool for me to find her and kind of get connected with her. And ever since then, I'll just text her questions about the business, and she's kind of like my go-to guru and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is so awesome. And yeah, I feel like everyone needs some type of mentor or guru, someone to get help from, especially when you don't really know what to do in the
Yeah,
beginning,
exactly.
right? It seems
You have
such like
no idea, and you're just step by step trying to just figure it out. That's been the entire process of this, is just step by step. I'm like, okay, what do I do next? And the best resource for that is talking to people who've already done it. So I've definitely tried to take
yeah.
advantage of picking people's brains on stuff related to what I'm doing.
Yeah, and to that point, like, how did you approach that? Like, how often did you try to talk to people or meet up with them and get coffee with them or figure this thing out? Like, how did you approach that?
So in the beginning, I don't really remember who told me to do this, but someone told me that I should reach out to as many business owners as I can who are doing what I want to do. So that's what I did. I emailed different restaurants in Milwaukee that I loved and different cafes. And it was just said, if you'd be willing to meet with me, I'd love to ask you some questions about how you started your business and what are the challenges? What do I need to do to be able to do what you're doing, basically? So I got some good meetings with some people that really are just so humble and willing to help. And that's something that I've really have taken away from this whole experience of building this business is people are willing to help you and without concern. So that kind of gave me a foot in the door with that. And another businesswoman who helped me a lot was the owner of Purple Door Ice Cream. They've started just this small, tiny company, and now they're huge. I don't know figures wise, but they're just this huge company in the Milwaukee area. And she told me to take this business plan class through this local women's organization. And that was another step I took to really start this path of building a business, because you can't start a business without a business plan. That was definitely drilled into my head in the beginning.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, I know Purple Door Ice Cream as well in terms of having been in Milwaukee and been like, oh my gosh, it's so good. so good. But the business plan, so what aspects of that was helpful? Just kind of mapping out your whole idea, or like what exactly was it for you?
Yeah. I mean, writing a business plan makes you just think so critically about your step-by-step action of what you're planning on doing, and really forces you to understand to the best of your ability the financials behind your idea. And if you don't understand the financials, I mean, you're not going to be successful.
Right. It's not going to be a good business.
Yeah. So, and that's something that, I mean, I just became obsessive about my business plan. I would go to work at Braise. I worked there full time. At nighttime, I would just work on my business plan. It kind of just became a hobby, and it was exciting because, you're writing about this dream that you have, and to every step of the way is just another piece of the puzzle where you're like, okay, yeah, that's right. I need money for that, or I need to allocate funds for this, or, oh yeah, I didn't think about payroll for this type of position. And you're just piecing this thing together. And I mean, I worked on my plan for years. Whoa. And I still do.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a working document in a way that's so helpful.
How in depth is your business plan at this point? I'm just curious.
Well, my business plan, when I was kind of ready to go for it and ready to really start seriously looking for funding, was somewhere around 60 pages. And I took it to this business development center through the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And my advisor there was like, you need to cut this down by half. No one's going to read all this. And I was so taken aback. I was like, what do you mean? I mean, this is my life's masterpiece.
Right.
I was like, what do you mean I have to cut it back? But I totally understand now, having gone through the loan process and all of that. Of course, you need to know what you're talking about, and you need to have the verbiage in there to explain your ideas. But really, what matters is the financial tables in the business plan. That's what the banks look at. That's what's important, not describing, in detailed adjectives, all of your menu items.
Yeah, especially because they're investing money as what they're going to eventually be doing. They want to know, like, well, let's check out, and they also probably were looking at a fair amount of other proposals potentially too.
Right, exactly.
So you had 60 pages. You had to cut that down because of that. And you mentioned the financing side of it. So someone wants to start, a physical business, like an actual retail store or something, or a restaurant. What is that like, trying to get the funds secured for that and like that whole process? Because I have no idea, and I'm sure other people who are trying to start something are also curious. Like what happens for that process?
Well, you have to be really thick-skinned, I think, to go through that process. Especially, I mean, I can only speak to my business and my industry, but opening a brick and mortar location is very, very difficult because there's so much risk involved. And there's, especially for a restaurant, there's just such extreme overhead costs that, it's not like a tech startup or a online company or something like that where you're going to, investors are going to be coming to you, or you don't need to buy tables and chairs and things like that. For a restaurant, I mean, you have to just buy so much stuff, and which means you need a lot of money. You need a lot of startup funds. And for a restaurant, the profit margin is usually pretty small. So there's a lot of room for risk and failure. So it's not, it's not the greatest investment opportunity for a lot of people. That's just how they view it. Yeah. So to get that loan or that financing, you have to just really know what you're talking about, and you have to be sure of yourself, and you have to kind of sell yourself in a way that you know what you're doing and you're passionate about it, and that's what matters. And you have to just prove that to whoever you're trying to get money from.
Yeah. And was it a process where it was, I mean, I guess, how long did that take for you to actually secure the financing? Just curious.
Well, I don't even know how many times. I tried 3 separate times for sure with 3 separate locations to open my cafe. And within those 3 separate times, I had to go back and apply for financing probably 12 to 15 times.
Wow.
And I just kept getting rejected.
You tried 3 different locations you're trying to get, and then financing for each one, because you're obviously, okay, didn't get that one. Next one, see how much this costs. Like that type of process, basically?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The first 2 locations, I just couldn't get the financing for it. And part of it is because I was trying to purchase a building. I mean, it's a whole different thing when you need the capital to raise funds for that. But it's just extremely difficult to get traditional financing from a bank. I tried through different, I mean, the probably the best way to go is through the SBA and get an SBA backed loan, which is what I wound up doing. But even that, I mean, it's just very hard to get those startup funds.
Yeah.
So you have to have the credibility of it first. I mean, I have the experience in my industry. Bankers are of a different mindset than entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes.
Kind of way of viewing the world. So like I said, you have to kind of sell yourself.
Yeah. And to the point of, like, obviously selling yourself, you had industry experience, but like in terms of business that was aside, as you were, catering and everything, like how much traction did you have there before you were kind of approaching this physical location, getting financing and all of that? Like how much traction did you have?
So for my side business, I think that I was in business for about 4 years before I decided to try and open a retail location. And within those 4 years, I mean, the first year I did maybe 1 or 2 weddings, and then just, made birthday cakes for family friends and things like that. And by the time I was looking to open my own place, I was doing over 50 weddings.
Whoa.
In a summer, and working 100-hour weeks between my full-time job and my side job, which wasn't really a side job anymore, but
it's like 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it was really intense for a while and still is. But the one thing that was frustrating for me in that process too was that these bankers or loan bodies of different organizations would tell me that I'm a startup, and we don't really, it's hard for startups to get loans, and we don't really do startups. But I'm like, well, I started this business 4 years ago. I'm not a startup. This is why I started the business on the side, so I could learn how to run a business. And I've proven over 4 years that I can be profitable, and I've grown the business over 100% each year. But still in their minds, because it wasn't a brick and mortar location. It was still a startup. And that was so frustrating for me. Is like, what else was I supposed to do?
Right. Like what?
I've been working in all my free time to build this business to be able to show that I know how to run a business. And then they're telling me, oh, well, no, you're really a startup. I was like, what are you talking about?
So that's incredibly frustrating. But you did eventually get, you said Small Business Association, I assume? Yeah. SBA, you said loan.
Yeah.
Take me through that when you finally got that loan.
I mean, it was so exhilarating. I've been working so hard at this goal. And I mean, I would say I'm pretty young on the spectrum of restaurant owners. So I think there was a lot of doubt about me and kind of pulling this off. And people kind of viewed me as, not as, I can't think of the word, just
seasoned experience. Maybe I don't know what the word.
Yeah, I guess so.
Typical, I guess.
Yeah. But for me, it was just, it's what I wanted to do, and I was just going to do it. And I wanted to own a restaurant by a certain age because I just wanted to. I wanted to just get it going. So then I can move on from there and build it to be bigger, etc. But anyways, when I got the loan, I mean, I had tried so many times, like I said. And then when the bank called me and said, we approved your loan, I couldn't. I was like jumping up and down in my living room. I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was, I'll never forget that moment.
That's amazing. That's incredibly exciting. Like I can only imagine how that would be, like finally get the financing after so many attempts of different locations and also so many tries to finally get the loan. Do you think there was anything different about like going through them and getting that loan than the other applications or places you had been? Like anything different about that as to how you got it?
Well, I don't know for certain, but the bank that I wound up working with, it was the only female bank officer that I had come into contact with.
Really?
And I think that there's something to be said about that. And my struggles as a young female in a room with a contractor, a building owner, a banker, they're all, 45, 50 plus year old men. Yep. And then there's me in my 20s, and I'm just saying, yeah, I'm going to open this business. And there's something different, at least in my opinion, when you're talking with a woman about that kind of thing, because she understands a little bit more than a man does. And
sure.
What it's like in that, to be a woman in that environment. And I also had another business vouch for me with this bank. They vouched for my business, which I think helped too. It was another small business that they were like, yeah, she knows what she's doing.
That's awesome.
So it's like those personal connections, and I know the banker had said after she gave me, she approved me for the loan. She said she has been doing small business loans for over 25 years, and she's kind of learned how to read people and who will succeed and who will fail. So apparently she believed that I would succeed.
That's awesome. And that, finally paid off, and finding the right people is so critical. And it's great that you had someone in your corner to kind of help you and vouch for you. But I think everyone needs that in some capacity, whether it be getting a loan or just growing the business in general. I want to hear about, and I want to dig into details of your business, but I also want to let you explain, like, what do you currently do today? What is the business today? What do you currently do? And then I want to dive into some more business details.
Sure. Well, the cafe is cafe and pastry shop, which is what I always wanted it to be. I wanted to do food and desserts. I never wanted to just own a bakery. So we have a breakfast and lunch menu that rotates seasonally. Then we also have a pretty extensive bakery display. And then we have a full espresso bar, coffee. We also do events at nighttime. So our cafe, we close at 3 p.m. And then people are able to rent out the space at nighttime for parties or bridal showers, baby showers, things like that. So we have a separate catering menu for that and wine and beer. And then I've continued to do the pastry catering with weddings. So we cater weddings all the time. We have multiple weddings almost every weekend during the summer that we still do. So it's kind of multifaceted. We kind of do a lot in a very small space.
Yes. And how did you decide that to do, open till 3 and then do events in the evening? Did you always know that that's what it was going to be?
Yeah, the events were kind of a add-on. It wasn't necessarily in the plan, but our space is well acclimated to that kind of party. It's just a really kind of, in my opinion, a very cozy, warm environment. So people kind of approached us about it, and then we decided to really just roll with it. And I have literally a catering and events manager on staff because we do so many events and catering.
How many events do you say you do, like a month, roughly?
Well, it kind of depends seasonally, but we'll do right now maybe 5 or 6 a month, and then during the summertime maybe more. But what's really kind of taken off too is our catering, which has been a surprise. It was not at all something that I thought we would be doing more of. We do, like, the medical college is right down the street, so we'll do catered breakfasts for them and things like that. It's been kind of a nice surprise. I didn't realize that would be something we'd be doing.
Yeah, nice little bonus on top of that. And
Yeah.
with that, I mean, like, going back to the beginning of the physical space and everything, like, how long did that take once you had the location? You chose the location, you finally got the financing for it, like, until you were up and running, actually. How long was that?
It was about 2 years ago, almost to the day, that I drove by the space and saw it was for rent. So I immediately just kind of went for it. So I called the number that was in the window and then called a couple of banks that I had already tried getting loans from. So started that process 2 years ago, February, and then got denied from those banks, of course, and then wound up with this third bank, and the loan was approved in March. So it really went pretty fast, but I had already had my business plan in place. I just had to kind of tweak the numbers for the specific location. And so I had the bulk of the legwork done already. And then the loan was approved in March. I took over the lease in April, and then we opened in July. So
Wow.
It was a pretty fast turnover.
That is quite, well, it's incentive, right?
Yeah.
To get it up and running too, once you're paying for it.
Yeah, exactly. You have a certain amount of working capital that you kind of build into your loan. Is like, okay, this is how long I think this is going to take. And then once that money runs out, it's like, well, we need revenue because now I have to pay rent.
Yeah. To actually pay rent every month. Like, yeah, we need to be making money now as soon as possible.
Right.
Goodness. And so you already had the business plan. So you pretty much, I assume, kind of knew, like, the menu, the layout, the price, the offerings, like all that stuff beforehand, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so once you found that space, you say you just had to tweak, like, things in terms of, like, the layout of the space and the kitchen and, like, all of that as well?
Yeah. Well, the space, I was lucky to have found a space that had previously been a restaurant, because there's a lot of overhead that goes into building out a restaurant, but a lot of that infrastructure was already there. So the things that we wound up changing were mostly just aesthetic. So painting and changing out some of the facades of things. So that's also a reason why it was such a fast turnaround.
Yeah.
And then had to get, equipment specific to my business. The place had formerly been a Thai restaurant, so there was like a 4-foot walk in the kitchen. So I definitely didn't need that. So I got rid of that and got the ovens installed that I needed. But it really was kind of a turnkey situation in respect as far as restaurants go.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's really convenient. And then, and to that point too, like, with growing, obviously, this restaurant and everything, you need people to staff it and team and everything. How did you approach that? So finding the right people to staff it and then to be, like, on your team, I guess, for growing this business.
I think staffing in the beginning was probably the number one challenge. I opened the restaurant with 2 people I had previously worked with. One came on as our general manager and one as our chef. And 2 weeks into it, our chef, it didn't work out with him. And he wound up just leaving 2 weeks after we opened,
Wow.
which obviously threw a huge wrench in my plan.
Yeah.
So after the monumental task of opening this cafe, then had to kind of scramble to replace my most important employee.
Making all of the food.
Yeah. So, everything works out the way it's supposed to, I believe. And then somehow wound up hiring on this most amazing chef. When he left, she kind of just through happenstance came to be at the cafe, and she's here now, and she's awesome. But that beginning of it was a struggle, and just learning how to be a boss in that role was also just a huge learning curve for me. I've managed people before in my specific department, but never, on the level of managing all these different subsets of the restaurant and paying attention to all the details of all that. That was a huge learning curve, and staffing the right people to help me do that took pretty much a year to kind of even out things and find the right fit for people. And that first year was tumultuous with staffing, but I feel pretty good with where we're at now.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's so important in any business, having the right staffing and people on the team. And it seems like such a challenge. It's like it can be so daunting. I imagine I've never had to really hire people for that type of thing. Like I have like an assistant helping with the podcast actually, but that's it. So I mean, what's helped you along the way in terms of managing people, and has there been anything that's been super helpful for you?
Well, I think my job just prior to opening the cafe, I worked for a larger restaurant group in Milwaukee who they owned a few restaurants, and they really spent a lot of time and put a lot of care into training their management team. And that was a really valuable experience for me to really learn on a systemic level of how to manage and how to interact with the people who work under you.
Yeah.
So that was a really great experience for me. I wasn't even there for a year because I wound up opening this place, but that was huge. And then I think just learning by experience. I mean, really, it's something you can't really, I think, be taught in a lot of ways. You just have to learn for yourself and be open to it. I mean, that's, I think, something I think I'm good at is listening to other people and valuing their opinions, because I don't know everything, and some of my employees are going to know that aspect of the business better than I am. So hiring for those positions and, filling in my weaknesses with their strengths.
Yeah. And going from 2017 when you launched to today, what has been the most helpful things for finding obviously people to come into the restaurant? Like, how have you grown the business since then? What are some of the things you've done marketing wise, advertising wise to grow the business?
Well, I do some paid advertising, but not a lot. One of the things that I've heard direct feedback about is we sponsor our local NPR station. So
Okay.
WUWM, they call it sponsorship, not advertisement, but we have a ad running on our local NPR station that, it's kind of a similar demographic of people that listen to the news on NPR that would come into our restaurant, and people say, "Oh, hey, I heard you on WUWM." So that's kind of like direct feedback. But a lot of it is, I think, word of mouth and just being in the community. We donate a lot of stuff to various organizations and schools. Like, when they have auctions and fundraisers and things like that, we'll donate desserts or gift card, things like that, where we're engaging with the community. And I think people value that, and we value that too, because we're a small business. And I mean, something I tell every employee when they start here is that it's an expectation of you to engage with our customers. And we have regulars that come in here multiple times a week. It's an expectation that you know their names, because small business doesn't succeed without the people who come and patron you. I mean, that's just a fact. So we need to be engaged with the community, and that's what this whole place is about. It's a neighborhood place. It's a place for people to feel welcome and to feel a part of the community. And so I think that's a huge part of it. It's kind of simple, but
simple, but not always easy necessarily.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So a lot of community events, a lot of sponsoring some things. You said NPR as well. Is there anything else you're kind of doing to get the word out?
We do marketing for our wedding and catering aspect of things through some local publications. But other than that, I mean, your typical social media, Instagram, Facebook, that stuff. But not really is in terms of paid advertising or anything like that.
Yeah, and there's always obviously so many different channels and ways to reach customers and grow. And there's only so much time in a day, which is kind of actually leading me to the next question I want to ask you is, how are you spending your time, day to day, week to week, month to month, as you're kind of running this business?
It has changed so much. I mean, it changes.
I imagine.
Yeah, it changes day to day what my role is. When we first opened, I was our full-time baker and also running the business and getting it going. So I would be working 18, 20-hour days in the first month or two. And then it's kind of been a slow progression of hiring on people to take over those roles. So now, I'm working in the office. We have an office up above the cafe. So I'm able finally, after a year and a half, to really, I can step out of the cafe day-to-day production or, day-to-day operations and focus on kind of the bigger ideas and driving the business forward. And I mean, that's honestly only within the last month has that happened. On some days when someone calls in sick or our chef was on maternity leave for a while, then I became the chef or I'm the line cook. The days that my baker is not here, I do the bakery and I wash dishes. I mean, I spent probably most of last winter just washing dishes because that was the void that needed to be filled and I was there, so I filled it. So,
yeah,
it's like you have to just be open to do whatever needs to be done to make the business succeed. And that's kind of, the first year or so was just kind of all hands on deck. We got to make this place stay. And, and now, I think we're here when we're stable and we're doing well. It's kind of a new role for me actually now to be like, okay, now what? Now where are we going and how am I going to get us there?
Yeah. And that's actually what I want to ask. Like, what is the vision moving forward now?
Well, I mean, I say this now. I mean, my ideas kind of change all the time, but
you're an entrepreneur, it happens.
Yeah, right. For now, I would love to see 3 or 4 Miss Molly's locations throughout the Milwaukee area. And then from there, who knows? But I think, 3 or 4 would be great because economies of scale, we would make, fairly good money being able to run a bakery production that large and also provide pretty good salaries and employment opportunities for my employees to be able to grow to that scale. Because at a certain point, we're going to max out with where we're currently located. And right. I want to keep my employees, number one, because they're great, and then provide opportunities for them to grow and excel in their careers and hopefully do that with my company.
Yeah. And knowing that that's the vision, I mean, at what point is it just that once you get to the point where you're close to being maxed out, then you're looking for locations, or are you like looking now? Like, how does it even work? Or how are you going to know,
Yeah.
to expand? Like when to expand, I guess is the question.
It is definitely kind of a fine balance, but I am already looking for location number 2. But what I've learned from the first time around, it's a long process and there's a lot of ups and downs, and I just have to be patient. And that's something I've definitely learned. I did not grow up as a patient kid. So I've learned that is something I've definitely learned in my adulthood. And through this whole process, nothing is just going to happen. I have to be patient.
Yeah. And managing the ups and downs you mentioned, like what's been helpful for you to kind of manage that? Obviously you mentioned being patient, but what has been helpful to manage the ups and downs of entrepreneurship?
I would definitely just say my family. I mean, this would be, I think, almost impossible to do without a support system. I mean, that's really, my mom would just, every step along the way, she would be there to encourage me and help me in whatever way that she could. And then I got married a few months ago. So
Congrats.
thanks. So yeah, my husband also, he met me right around the time that I started trying to open my brick and mortar place. So he's kind of seen the whole process from the very low points to the high point of finally opening this place. So he gets it, and they both have been there supporting me, and there's no way I could have done it without them.
Yeah, people and the support is incredibly important just to have that system around you, knowing you can fall back on that. And were there any books, podcasts, audiobooks, conferences, anything that's been helpful, particularly in this kind of entrepreneurial journey of yours?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I read a lot of books to begin with. I mean, some of the most basic stuff, like how to write a business plan for dummies, even like that kind of stuff. I mean, just anything you can get your hands on, do what you want to do. I mean, I used this business plan program called Live Plan. That was hugely helpful to help me map out and write a business plan. And I took, like I mentioned before, I took that class through a local women's organization. I used the free resources through the Small Business Development Center at the local university. And I just sign up for programs that are available. Like, it's kind of amazing how many resources are out there for entrepreneurs, even in a small city like Milwaukee. I mean, I signed up for a conference last week and I'm going to one in March. And there's just so many free resources to use. And then I'm sure you know of the podcast, How I Built This. I mean, that I'm obsessed with that podcast, just listening to these people's stories of their struggles and how scrappy some of their stories are. And it's like, yes, I can relate. I know exactly what you're talking about. And just knowing that this is a shared experience, like sometimes it can feel very lonely and very isolating, but you're like, no, this is what it is. This is the work. This is what it means to be an entrepreneur. And you just constantly have this hope that it's going to work out.
Yes, and that's why you put all the work in, right? Because that's what you're hoping for the whole time.
Yep.
You're like, it's going to work out eventually. And knowing that people have made it and obviously have done it, you're just like, all right, have the patience and keep putting in the work, knowing that, eventually this thing is going to keep growing and it's all going to be okay.
Yep. You have to just keep telling yourself that.
Exactly. And then to some point, I guess entrepreneurs can be delusional in that regard, but it's a fine line between that, because a lot of people don't start businesses. It's a very difficult thing to do, but you have that faith and that hope and you put in the work to make it happen. I'm curious what you would tell someone who is like actually serious about opening a restaurant, has some skills in that regard, and maybe has a background, at least in restaurants. Like, what would you tell them on starting a business or starting a restaurant?
I get this question kind of often, actually. And I think the most important part of it in my mind is having experience and knowing exactly what you're getting yourself into. Because I think especially for restaurants, people oftentimes have kind of a glamorous idea or kind of a delusional idea of what it means to work in a restaurant or own one. And you have to have the day-to-day hands-on experience to know what you're getting into. Because like I said, it is hard work. It's so hard. It's hot. Like I said, if you're a chef, you're working in 110-degree kitchens every day, long hours, and it's stressful, but you have to know what you're getting yourself into and you have to be passionate about it. I mean, that's something that would never waver for me. It was the passion of what I want to do. And I just couldn't see myself doing anything else. That this was what I was going to do and I was going to make it happen. So,
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's like you have to understand like the reality of it and also kind of have that fearlessness of I'm just going to go for it. And I know that I want that to happen.
It's awesome. Yes. So needed. So needed. Where can people go to learn more about the restaurant and everything you're doing, both in Milwaukee and online as well?
Well, our website is missmollyscafe.com. So that lists all of our services and kind of what we're about, what we stand for. And I think, our social media, Instagram, Miss Molly's Cafe, we're pretty current on our social media pages. So I guess that would be where to go.
Awesome. I will link that up in the show notes as well at justgogrind.com/podcast. If you're in Milwaukee, check it out. Where exactly in Milwaukee? I've been there, but I don't remember exactly.
It's on 92nd and Center Street in Milwaukee.
Perfect. Molly, thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to do it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Just Go Grind. As always, the show notes are over at justgogrind.com/podcast. And you can support the show over at patreon.com/justgogrind. And please leave a rating and review over on iTunes. It does help more people find the show. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great day.